Give me the next 15 minutes and I'll walk you through the exact blueprint to reverse chronic inflammation and safeguard yourself from its future damage. I'm Dr. Jamie Richards, CEO of Life by Design with over 100 locations worldwide. I'm also the clinic director at the Life by Design Center in Chatham, Kent. Inflammation is a popular topic, but the way most people think about inflammation is incorrect. I want to tell you, number one, inflammation is good. And that might be shocking to you to think about it from this perspective. We're often told that inflammation is bad. It's the cause of all kinds of chronic health conditions, and we need to be on an anti-inflammatory diet, or we need to take anti-inflammatories, or if we're in pain, we need to take cortisone shots. We need to stop this inflammation. But it's important to note, like the vast majority of things that the body does, it does it on purpose. So inflammation is good. The problem is chronic, and here's the key, unresolved inflammation is bad. The important part here is unresolved. When you look at the inflammatory pathway, let's talk about it a little bit. On the left, you can see the amount of immune system cells that are being secreted or released. On the bottom, time, minutes, hours, days, months, and into years. The normal process for the body is to create inflammation in response to lots of different things, whether it's a foreign invader, could be tissues that the body doesn't recognize or thinks that are problematic. And what will happen is the body creates inflammation on purpose. It's part of the healing process. In fact, if you think about inflammation as healing, that's a really great way to think about it. But it's like a safety pin. It goes around and round and around. And so this inflammatory process is purposefully created, and then it resolves. And if you look at the resolution time frame, I mean, it can be anywhere from hours to days. That's the normal process. Now, where inflammation becomes bad is not in the initial state, but when it becomes chronic, and the key here is unresolved. So you have these immune cells that are floating around in the body, and your body starts to attack them. And that attacking of immune cells leads to this chronic inflammatory process. And the issue is the chronic inflammation. So when you start to understand this, it changes the way your perspective is around what would I do in this scenario. So I want you to think about inflammation like a cup of water, really, that's being filled up. And it's not just local to the area. It's something that's happening all over the place. So you may have a specific response in a local tissue and assume that, oh, hey, that's where there's a problem. It's in my shoulder, it's in my spine, or it's in another part of my body. But it doesn't work that way. It's flooding all over the place. It's affecting all parts of your body because this chronic unresolved inflammation has an effect everywhere. It's not like you have a bridge inside your body. It tends to move everywhere. And when you think about it, every single tissue is interconnected, whether it's the nervous system, whether it's our organ systems, whether it's any cells in our body, or brain tissue. All of these tissues play an absolutely vital role in the interconnectedness and how the body works. And so when inflammation starts to overflow, if you will, and start to think of it that way, it leads to chronic. You can see this terminology, inflammaging, is a more popular term, which really just means that there's a chronic, low grade, right? We think of inflammation as, oh my gosh, I have inflammation, there's red, there's burning, I have a fever. But it's not. It's this chronic, low grade inflammation that develops over time, and it's not caused by an infection, and it contributes to major clinical changes. So I'm going to put it this way. It literally eats away at the cells and tissues and organs in your body. And if you think, well, that sounds crazy, there's no way that this chronic inflammation has this dramatic effect, start to look at the data, whether it be cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, chronic kidney disease, depression, cancers, neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's, muscle loss. The effect of chronic inflammation is now well documented, and it's global, it's systemic. It's not local to one area, and so it can affect all kinds of tissues. You could make the case that chronic, low-grade, unresolved inflammation is at the root of hundreds of disease conditions. Now, is it the individual cause of those? That's still up to debate. Is it a major factor? Yes, in many of these, it is a major, major factor. If you think about the inflammation process, I want you to interchange these words. Inflammation, especially with a normal, healthy resolution of inflammation, is healing. That is the body's process. That is what it does. There's damage, or there is the interpretation of damage, and the body mounts an immune defense and it resolves that immune defense. And it's this cycle back and forth of healing and repair, healing and repair, healing and repair. The body's killing off cells all the time. It's when it doesn't happen in an ideal way where those cells that should have been killed or damaged or should have been killed and consumed, or what we call autophagy, they end up just floating around and the body keeps attacking them. And depending on the tissue that's getting attacked, if you take cardiovascular disease as an example, we hear a lot about, and especially 10, 15 years ago, elevated cholesterol levels, that's the cause. And now we know that cholesterol in and of itself is not the cause of heart disease, it's inflammation. And certainly cholesterol may play a role as it's floating around inside the body, but the degree you have, certain cholesterol markers is not a great indicator for your cardiac risk. The inflammatory process is making the tissue damaged, and it's incorporating cholesterol into the arterial walls as part of the healing process, but it does create fatty streaks, and then there's sclerosis. And again, that can be a problem long term. But what was the underlying issue? The underlying issue was inflammation. You can start looking at type 2 diabetes, and you may know somebody who has type 2 diabetes and has had that for a period of time, and maybe they have neuropathies, or maybe they have damage to tissues in their body. That's inflammation. Now look at Alzheimer's, inflammation of the brain. There is inflammation at the core of many, many disease conditions, which then affects us in many, many ways with our health and our well-being. One of the things that's very, very important to understand is that these things take time to happen. It's not an immediate, I have inflammation and then it doesn't resolve and it continues on. And within a day or two or a month, you're going to know that's happening. And that comes back to how health is created. Health is an ongoing process of cells in the body working the way they're supposed to work. If you look at the image on the screen, 100% health is at one end, and then early death or death is at the other end. But you don't go from 100% health to death. You go through a process of normal function of the cells and then malfunction, and then those cells start to become perceivably damaged, whether it's through x-rays or blood work or other types of imaging. You can actually see physical disease processes happening. And in most cases, the end stage of that is symptoms. So I want you to think about this. If you're deciding what to do for your health today, based on whether you feel good or bad, you look at this graphic. Can you see the extreme problem? You could have no symptoms and be very far down the pathological process, the disease process. You could be in the malfunction process. The goal is to move as close as possible to managing the optimal function of the body. So it brings us to how most people approach health in general in a way that, I'm just going to be blunt, it doesn't work. It is in opposition to what we know about how the body works. This idea, and I'm just using anti-inflammatory approach, but really it's this symptom-based approach is what it is. This thought that I have a symptom, I'm going to eradicate this symptom and magically I'm healthy. I've used this example a lot. If I have a leaf and the leaf is turning brown and I cut that leaf off, I didn't make the plant any healthier. I just removed tissue that was dying. And so if you use that same analogy in your body, how often are you trying to treat a symptom? How often are you cutting off a tissue that's damaged, but you're not changing what led to that production in the first place? Do you not believe that that plant and its next leaf, if nothing changes, the next leaf won't be brown as well? So we need to reorient ourselves to what health really is and what it takes to be healthy. Now, specifically in this training, I'm talking about inflammation because inflammation is at the core of the healing process. And inflammation is good. Chronic, unresolved inflammation is bad. Now, here's what we know about taking anti-inflammatories. So this is just making my point. You look at the data on anti-inflammatory use. Sure, there's a short-term pain reduction because you're shutting off the inflammatory cycle. But what you're not doing is allowing the body to resolve inflammation. You're actually stepping in and turning it off. And I already said inflammation is good. It's part of the healing process. So what do you imagine happens if you turn off a part of the healing process? You turn off the inflammatory process that is necessary for your body to heal itself. Well, of course, it's going to be problematic. And if you look at the data, 2 to 10 years later, patients are in more pain. So their chronic pain increases, even though they used anti-inflammatories, because they don't work for long-term resolution of healing and health, right? You have to kick in the body's resolution pathway. And what that means is we have to start looking at the body from more of a strategic standpoint. Go back to the plant analogy. There's certain things a plant needs in order to be healthy. What does it need? It needs water, soil, sunlight, nutrients, carbon dioxide, and you can't step on the stem. I mean, that's literally it. If you just give the plant those things, create a better environment and don't create a physical obstruction to growth, I don't have a green thumb, but I can tell you most plants are going to grow if you figure those things out. Your body is no different. And so when you have measured that you have cardiovascular disease or diabetes or chronic pain syndromes or immobility, I mean, you go down the list, it doesn't even matter. And it's not to say that applying these principles to your body is going to resolve every issue. Some issues have been there too long, the damage hasn't been done. But at the end of the day, giving the plant what it needs is still good for the plant. And the same is true if we take care of our body. We may not get the same amount of life we would have gotten had we started 30 years ago, but the quality of our life can increase and we can get as many years out of our life as absolutely possible. What I'm telling you is that addressing the symptoms, and in this case, trying to turn off inflammation, is not going to work in the long term, even though you may get a short-term pain reduction. So what do we need to do? We need to look at the body more from what I call a requirements and strategy standpoint. And I know this graphic is small, but it makes a point. On the left side, what you can see are the needs of the body: movement, fuel. Obviously, we need to have a healthy attitude and healthy mindset. I'm going to talk today about the importance of the brain and nervous system and how that plays a role in those inflammation pathways doing their job, right, and allowing for healing and repair. But if you look at the middle, what it's like is a gas tank. It's like a cup. And when you fulfill the things your body needs, it goes up, and that is your health level. Now, what most people do is they tend to take that symptom-based approach. And instead of filling up what the body needs, they're just trying to cut off the parts that are breaking, or they're trying to shut off the messaging system. It's like your car and the gas light comes on, and instead of filling it up with gas because it needs gas, you're just putting a piece of tape over the signal so you don't know that you're being warned that you're low on gas. It sounds crazy, I know, but this is exactly what we do with our health. So we need to think about this very, very differently. What are the requirements of the body? And I've broken them down really simply. Inside the Life by Design program, we go far more in depth and give direction on how to implement these steps. But I really want you to understand at the top level why many things that you're doing aren't working, or many people around you are doing things that aren't working. We need nutrient sufficiency. Basically, we need the building blocks for our body's resolution pathway, right? So it makes inflammation good, resolves inflammation also good, chronic unresolved inflammation bad. All right, stick with me. So we need the proper nutrients. We need movement. Believe it or not, the movement of your body in general with specific types, I'll talk about those, the movement of your spine specifically, those components play a role in the inflammatory process. And then sleep sufficiency. So what are the nutrients? Now, I'm going to break it down into four. You could go beyond that. I'm going to talk about the four big ones that play a role in the resolution pathway. So, again, the inflammation being turned off when it's necessary, the healing process, if you will. Vitamin D sufficiency. Vitamin D, this data is extensive at this point. Making sure you have enough vitamin D being produced by your body. This is one study looking at people who increased their vitamin D levels, not just took it and I took a couple thousand international units, but actually measured it and saw the measurements go up from 20 nanograms per milliliter to 60. All that means is they had more vitamin D in their body, and they had a major reduction in breast cancer, 80%, I believe, in these cases. And again, I'm just pulling up specific data very quickly to make the point. Omega-3 sufficiency, if you don't have enough omega-3s, and more so the balance between omega-3s and 6s, then your body can't do its job. Part of what it does is it eats the cells after they're done. So your body makes the immune cells, and then it eats the cells. It's part of this beautiful process. But when it doesn't, because it doesn't have all the things it needs in order to do its job, one of those things is omega-3 sufficiency. I'll tell you an interesting stat. If you look at the reason people generally died during the pandemic, it was acute respiratory distress. It was not specifically due to the viral infection. Now, the viral infection created those changes, but what should happen is your body should heal that, right? Resolve that, kick up the inflammation as part of the healing process, resolve those pathways. And in many people it did. Unfortunately, in those who didn't, what they died of was acute respiratory distress. Now, when studies were done where they added omega-3s in the form of fish oil, they added vitamin D, they saw a major, and I'm talking hundreds of percent improvement in mortality. Basically, people were able to live where in other cases they didn't have these pieces in place and they weren't able to. So very, very strong confirmation, lots of data on this too. So omega-3 sufficiency. Microbiome restoration, your gut and how your gut works. Your gut plays a major role in systemic inflammation. It just does. And so making sure that we have beautiful development of gut bacteria, there's things you can do to improve that. Again, we'll talk about those. Magnesium sufficiency, so making sure we have enough magnesium, those play a role in inflammation and oxidative stress. So again, what you need to know from a dietary perspective is we need those building blocks, okay? And real food first, that is certainly our main takeaway. But from a specific nutrient standpoint, we need omega-3s, we need vitamin D, we need magnesium, and we need healthy gut bacteria. From the movement side of things, there's a couple pieces to this. I'm going to talk right now about segmental spinal input. You might not think of the spine as anything other than, I have an achy back. And obviously, if you look at that health spectrum back and forth, sure, in some cases, if you have a spinal problem, it may manifest over time as different symptoms, but the symptoms are not the problem. The flip side of that is you could have no symptoms and still have a spinal problem. Now, the spinal problem in and of itself is its own problem, but here's where it becomes really, really connected to the inflammatory process. If you look at the spine, all the pieces of the spine need to move. Every single vertebrae has a requirement for motion, and part of that movement helps feed the brain with information. There's little receptors inside of all the joints in the spine. In fact, more so than any other joint in the body. And that movement feeds the brain. The problem is when it doesn't move, it's almost like a cavity. And I think we all understand the cavity. When we have a cavity, it creates inflammation in our mouth, right? Because again, that inflammation in the mouth then goes beyond the mouth. We know today that, oral problems relate to cardiovascular risk and other measurements of systemic inflammation. And so we need to move the spine segmentally. Sure, we need to move it in terms of exercise. I'll talk about that. But where corrective chiropractic, or what we call biostructural restoration, comes in, it's not traditional chiropractic. It is about moving the spine strategically in a measured way based on tests, x-rays, all kinds of other data to be able to say, look, the spine's not moving. Here's how it needs to move. And we can measure the improvements. But the takeaway there, what I want you to understand is movement of the spine is so important to the input systems of the body. And when the spine doesn't move, that lack of motion creates inflammation around the spine, like a cavity. And then that inflammation starts to build and go beyond that. And I used that example early in this presentation. We talked about the water pouring into the cup, and it's expanding everywhere. So every piece, by the way, whether it's the spine not moving, whether it's stress, whether it's other things that are pro-inflammatory, what's happening is they're increasing the burden of inflammation on your body, the load of inflammation on your body. And it's not just in one area. It goes everywhere and affects every cell, every organ, and every tissue. And this is why I'm having this conversation. They did one study just to talk about how the joints of the body and they need to move. They stopped a rabbit's knee, I think it was, from moving. You can see in the study. Within 9 weeks of not moving a joint, it already started to create scar tissue. It already started to create, what I was talking about, that example of the cavity. And so even if you look at the data on moving the spine in terms of a corrective chiropractic standpoint, in this study looked at its effect on the brain. Conclusions, findings indicate that many health benefits of corrective chiropractic are due to altered brain activity. Basically what I'm saying is when the spine moves, the brain gets better information. You don't have local inflammation, and that local inflammation doesn't dissipate and become systemic inflammation, go everywhere, affect every organ, every tissue. So what are the other parts of movement that are important? Resistance training. We think of exercise, we often think of, I need to run a marathon, I need to run long distances, I need to lose body fat, so I'm going to start running. I'm not anti-running by any means, but here's what the data tells me. Resistance training, building strength. And I'm going to say this and make this point, and I'm going to just hammer it home. As much as I think all the things I've talked about already are important, and they're among the most important things any person can do for their health, if there is a panacea, one thing that if I had to pick one thing over anything when it comes to health, for every reason, longevity, inflammatory, restoration, healing and repair, like literally the list goes on and on, resistance training. This is the one. In fact, if you look at data on, stopping smoking or, reducing body fat or, there's lots of things that you can do, omega-3s, vitamin, all these things, they have an impact on the rate at which people die, what we call all-cause mortality, 10%, 20%, 30%. But you know what resistance training? It's mind-blowing, really, when you look at the data. Being strong compared to not being strong is around a 250% decrease in all-cause mortality. So what that means is resistance training by far beats anything else that you are going to do for your health, and your ability to stay strong over your lifetime compared to somebody who isn't strong is one of the highest predictors of longevity and health. And why? Because when we move, we strengthen our body, when we especially apply resistance training, and that strength it's anti-inflammatory. Again, a lot of this stuff comes back to the inflammatory process because, as I said, chronic unresolved inflammation, not inflammation, unresolved inflammation is majorly damaging cells and tissues in your body, contributing to all kinds of disease conditions that people have. It just is. And so the other part of it is energy systems training. That's what we call it inside the Move by Design training system. I'm not talking about long distance running or endurance training. There is a level of aerobic activity that will reduce the inflammatory markers. And if you get beyond that, so again, not discounting marathons and long distance and the stuff that people think is super healthy, those can be quite pro-inflammatory, meaning they make it difficult to resolve the chronic inflammation because it's creating a lot of inflammation. So I always believe that the training side of things needs to be very strategic. Same thing with the spinal segment input. It needs to be strategic. It can't just be random. Even with the nutritional prescriptions, it needs to be specific. How much vitamin D do I need? How much omega-3s do I need? You can't just throw things at a wall and hope that it's going to work. We know the data on what works, and so it's applying it individually to each person. So what does the blueprint look like? Very top level overview. And again, we can go into very more specific details, but vitamin D sufficiency, most adults probably going to be 5,000 units a day. But again, you have to have your blood work to really know. For every 40 pounds, about 1,000 international units. Omega-3s, you're going to want a mix of EPA, DHA, and DPA fats. Again, I don't want to overcomplicate it. You just need omega-3s. They need to be the right ones. They can't be plant-based. They need to be animal-based, and you need to have enough of them. Same with probiotics, a nice broad spectrum probiotic. 10, 15, 20, 30 billion cultures would be great. Magnesium, biostructural restoration, that's what we use to address the segmental spinal input in a strategic way. And the Move by Design training system is a strategic way to introduce resistance training and purposeful energy systems work. So it doesn't go too far beyond and start interrupting the resolution of the inflammation, creating a bigger problem. It's part of the benefit and it's part of the restoration of what we want to see happen. And so here's the take home, everybody. Inflammation is good. Right? Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Inflammation is good, but chronic unresolved inflammation is bad. Right? Inflammation is good. Chronic unresolved inflammation is bad. How do we reduce chronic unresolved inflammation? We give our body the building blocks. We meet the requirements that the body has to trigger this pathway and do its job properly. And when we do, we've set ourselves up in the best possible way to have the highest quality of life for the longest period of time. Vitamin D, omega-3, probiotics, magnesium, biostructural restoration, Move by Design training system. This is what we call the Life by Design blueprint. And part of why I do these trainings is so you understand there is something there available for you to learn how to do this. Now, if you're in Chatham-Kent, wonderful. There's links below somewhere in this training. You can access those different pieces. If you're not, we have Life by Design offices all over the world. You can contact us, or maybe you saw this from somewhere else in the world, and we'll find you a place where you can find doctors and corrective chiropractors and trainers and coaches who understand this system and can apply it for you properly. So inflammation good, chronic unresolved inflammation bad, and just know when it comes to your health, you're worth it.